"Eyes on the floor, Jordan. That's where you belong." The voice belonged to Clinton Steele. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the casual boredom of a king speaking to a pebble. Clinton was the crown prince of St. Jude's Ivy Academy. His father owned half the skyline and Clinton owned the rest. As he walked past, he tilted his hand. A $5 salted caramel latte poured out in a slow, viscous stream, splashing across the white marble I'd just spent 3 hours polishing. The sound of the mop bucket's plastic wheels squeaking against the marble floor was the only rhythm my life had. Squeak, slosh, scrub. "Oops," Clinton chuckled. He didn't stop. He didn't even look back. He just wiped his hand on a silk handkerchief and tossed the cloth onto the spill. "Make sure you get the grout, Ghost. I can still see my reflection's disappointment." His friends, the Council of Suits I called them, erupted in laughter. They stepped over the puddle, purposefully tracking the sticky brown liquid down the hallway. I didn't say a word. I just tightened my grip on the mop handle until my knuckles turned white. In this school, I was a work-study student. To the administration, I was a statistic for their diversity brochure. To the students, I was the trash collector. Before we get into how I turned Clinton Steele's world into a digital graveyard, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been the underdog in a room full of people who thought they were better than you? Drop a yes in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I'm looking for the real ones today. And if you're ready to see a billionaire's son lose everything to a guy with a mop, hit that subscribe button right now. I was halfway through cleaning the latte when Professor Holloway walked by. He was the head of the advanced physics department, a man who prided himself on pure intellect. He saw me huddled over the spill, but he also saw the open textbook tucked into my supply cart, Quantum Field Theory. He stopped, a thin, mocking smile spreading across his face. He used the toe of his expensive loafer to flip the book shut. "Jordan, isn't it?" Holloway asked. "I admire the ambition, truly, but let's be realistic. You're here to ensure the environment is conducive to actual study. Leave the physics to the students who will actually use it. You should focus on the dirt, not the stars. It's much more within your reach." "I understand, Professor," I said, my voice a low, raspy rasp. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. "I'll make sure the stars are polished." He scoffed and walked away. They all thought I was a blank slate. They didn't know that while I was mopping their floors, I was mentally deconstructing their firewalls. They didn't know that my plastic bag of books contained a custom-built Linux rig that could bypass the school's mainframe in 20 seconds. I was J0, the anonymous architect of the Aegis protocol, the encryption that protected 40% of the world's private equity. I lived in a dorm room the size of a closet and ate ramen so I could stay invisible. I wanted to see if I could make it on my own, without the millions sitting in my offshore accounts. I wanted to see if the world was as cruel as my father said it was. It was worse. By 6 p.m., I was done. My back was a knot of fire, and my hands smelled like lemon-scented bleach. But tonight was my mom's birthday. She was back in the city, working double shifts at a diner to help me get ahead. She didn't know I was already a millionaire. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to buy her the one thing she'd stared at in magazines for years, the Vogue and Verve royal purple silk scarf. I didn't change my clothes. I didn't have time. I hopped on the bus, my St. Jude's facilities hoodie, damp with sweat. I walked into the boutique. The air was pressurized with the scent of French perfume. The manager, a man named Sterling, no relation to my lawyer, looked at me like I was a leak in the ceiling. "Can I help you find the service entrance?" he asked, blocking the aisle. "I'm here for the purple scarf," I said. I pulled out the envelope, $2,000. It was all the money I'd officially earned from my janitorial work over the last 6 months. I wanted this gift to be from Jordan the son, not J0 the hacker. "That scarf is $2,200, plus tax," the manager said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And we don't accept crumpled bills from people who look like they've been sleeping in a basement. It's legal tender," I replied, "and I have the rest in my account." Suddenly, the door chimes rang. My heart sank. Clinton Steele walked in, Chloe on his arm. He saw me standing there with my envelope of cash, and his eyes lit up with predatory joy. "No way," Clinton laughed, pulling out his phone. "The ghost is trying to play dress-up? Hey, Chloe, look, the janitor is trying to be a person." He started recording. "Hey, everyone, check this out. St. Jude's finest floor scrubber is trying to buy a scarf that costs more than his house. Hey, manager, you better check his pockets. I saw him near the faculty lockers earlier today." The manager's face shifted from annoyance to customer service mode for Clinton. "Mr. Steele, so good to see you. Don't worry, I was just about to escort this individual out." "I have the money," I shouted, but it was too late. The manager grabbed the envelope from my hand. looked at the small bills and threw them onto the floor. "This is trash. Get out before I call the police for harassment." The security guard, a man 3 times my size, grabbed me by the hood. He dragged me across the floor, the same kind of floor I spent my life cleaning, and threw me out into the rain. "And stay out, trash!" Clinton yelled, his laughter echoing as he tossed a penny at me. It landed in a puddle next to my head. I sat there in the rain. My mother's birthday money was scattered in the mud. My school was mocking me. My professors looked down on me. I picked up the penny. I stood up. The humble experiment was over. "You want to see the stars, Professor?" I whispered. "I'm about to turn your lights out." The walk back to my dorm was a blur of neon lights and cold rain. Every time a car splashed a puddle onto my jeans, I didn't flinch. I was already gone. I wasn't Jordan the janitor anymore. I was a series of algorithms, a silent force moving through the wires of the city. I reached my room, a literal broom closet I shared with a roommate who barely knew my name. I waited until I heard his steady snoring, then reached under my bed. I pulled out a rugged, military-grade Pelican case. Inside sat the black box, a laptop with no branding, no serial number, and enough processing power to crack a bank's encryption in a lunch hour. I flipped the lid. The blue light hit my face, making my eyes sting. First, I found the video. Clinton Steele had already posted it. It was on the St. Jude's burn book page, titled "Janitor Tries to Play Dress Up." It had 3,000 views. The comments were a cesspool of elitism. I watched the moment the manager threw my mother's money into the dirt. I watched Clinton laugh. Then I began to type. "Login, J0, I whispered. "Target, Steele Global Holdings." I didn't start by stealing his money. That's what a thief does. I'm an architect. I started by looking at the foundation. Clinton's father, Arthur Steele, was a man who lived on the edge of legality. I found the weak point in exactly 12 minutes, a bridge loan for a new skyscraper that was being collateralized by a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I didn't delete the loan. I just sent a small anonymous flag for review to the Federal Reserve's automated compliance system. It was a digital pebble that would start a landslide. Next, I turned my attention to Vogue and Verve. I found the boutique's parent company, Lux Universal. They were struggling, looking for a silent partner to buy out their retail leases in the Cherry Creek district. I opened my primary brokerage account. The balance made my own head spin. $412 million sterling, I typed into an encrypted chat to my lawyer. "I want the Cherry Creek district, all of it, by 8 a.m., and find out who the manager of Vogue and Verve is. I want his employment contract on my desk. It's a Sunday night, Jordan," he replied instantly. "The banks run on my code, Sterling. Tell them if they aren't open for me, I'll take my protocol to their competitors. Buy the leases, buy the building." The next morning, I was back at work. I had my mop. I was scrubbing the stairs in the main foyer when Clinton walked in, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than a car. He stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down at me. "Hey, Ghost," Clinton shouted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of loose change, tossing it down the stairs. The coins clattered against marble, rolling past my feet. "Pick it up. Consider it a tip for the entertainment last night." I didn't pick up the coins. I just looked at my watch. 8:14 a.m. Right on cue, Clinton's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting a text. Instead, his face went pale. "What? Declined? That's impossible." "Something wrong, Clinton?" I asked, my voice calm. "Shut up, janitor," he snapped. "It's just a glitch." Just then, the massive oak doors of the student union swung open. My lawyer, Sterling, stepped in, holding a leather briefcase. Every head in the foyer turned. This was the man who handled the city's most powerful people, and he was walking straight toward the janitor. Clinton tried to stand tall. "Sterling, what are you doing here? Did my dad send you about the credit card?" Sterling didn't even glance at him. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head. "The district has been secured, Mr. Carter. You now own the Vogue and Verve building and the land it sits on. Also, the Board of Trustees is waiting for you. They received your donation." The silence was so thick you could taste it. Clinton Steele's jaw dropped. I stood up, leaving the mop in the bucket. I walked up the stairs until I was standing inches from his face. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the penny he had thrown at me in the rain, and pressed it into his palm. "Keep it, Clinton," I said. "You're going to need every cent." I didn't wait for Clinton to find his words. I turned my back on him and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the student union, Sterling trailing half a step behind me like a silent shadow. Behind us, I could hear the frantic murmurs of the students. The ghost had just stood up, and the world they thought they knew was beginning to tilt. "The car is waiting, Mr. Carter," Sterling said, his voice smooth and professional. "We have the manager of Vogue and Verve, a Mr. Miller, scheduled for a briefing in 10 minutes. He currently believes he's meeting with a representative from the new holding company. Good, I said, stepping into the back of the black SUV. Let's see how he handles the surprise. As we drove toward the Cherry Creek district, I pulled out my tablet. I wasn't just buying buildings, I was pulling the threads of Clinton Steele's safety net. My automated scripts had already identified 3 of Arthur Steele's offshore accounts that were now flagged for suspicious activity. By noon, the Steele family's private jet would be grounded for a tax audit. By dinner, their luxury car leases would be revoked. We pulled up to the front of Vogue and Verve. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the glass storefront sparkling and cruel. Through the window, I saw Miller. He was wearing the same smug expression as he rearranged a display of Italian leather bags. He looked up as the SUV stopped, his eyes widening at the sight of Sterling. I stepped out of the car. I was still wearing the St. Jude's Facilities hoodie, now wrinkled and stained with the salt of the sidewalk where I'd been thrown before. I pushed the door open. The chime rang, that same light melodic sound that had mocked me less than 24 hours ago. Miller hurried forward, a practiced, oily smile on his face. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor. We were told the new landlord might be dropping by, but we didn't expect—" He stopped dead. His gaze slid from Sterling's expensive suit to my face. The smile didn't just fade, it curdled. "You?" Miller hissed, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "I thought I told the guards to make sure you were banned from this block. Get out before I call the police." "Actually, Mr. Miller," Sterling interrupted, his voice like dry parchment, "you should probably listen to what he has to say. This is the representative of the new holding company. In fact, he is the holding company." Miller looked from me to Sterling, then back to my hoodie. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "This is a joke, right? A social media prank? This boy is a janitor at the college. He was here last night begging to buy a scarf with literal pocket change." "It wasn't pocket change, Miller," I said, stepping into his personal space. "It was $2,000 earned through honest work, something I suspect you haven't done in years." I reached into the display case and picked up the royal purple silk scarf. Miller reached out instinctively to stop me, but Sterling stepped into his path with a single raised eyebrow. "You're fired, Miller," I said quietly. "For cause. Harassment of a customer, physical assault by proxy via your security staff, and general incompetence." "You can't do that," Miller stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "I have a contract. I've been the top-grossing manager for 5 years. I bought your contract, Miller," I replied, tossing the scarf over my shoulder. "And as the new owner of the lease, the building, and the brand's regional distribution, I'm exercising the morality clause you signed. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. If you're still here after that, I'll have you removed by the same guards you used on me. Only this time, I'll make sure the video goes viral." Miller's knees seemed to buckle. He looked at the floor, the same floor he'd thrown my money onto. "Oh, and one more thing," I added as I walked toward the door. "That penny Clinton Steele threw at me, I'm deducting it from your final paycheck. Accuracy is important in business, don't you think?" I walked out of the store into the bright morning sun. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste like bleach and dust. It tasted like leverage. "What's next, sir?" Sterling asked. "The dean," I said, looking toward the spires of St. Jude's in the distance. "He's been ignoring my emails about the broken heating in the scholarship dorms for 3 months. I think it's time we had a face-to-face." I walked into the administrative building of St. Jude's with the royal purple silk scarf still draped over my arm. I didn't change out of my janitor's uniform. I wanted them to see the person they had spent 3 years ignoring. Sterling walked beside me, his briefcase a silent threat to anyone who dared to block our path. The receptionist, a woman who had looked through me 100 times while I emptied her trash can, started to stand up to tell me I was in the wrong place. Then she saw Sterling. She sank back into her chair, her mouth clicking shut. The dean's office was a shrine to old money. Mahogany walls, leather-bound books that no one actually read, and a window that looked out over the pristine quad. Dean Sterling, no relation to my lawyer, though the irony wasn't lost on me, was on the phone, laughing at something involving a golf handicap. He looked up, saw me, and his face twisted into an expression of pure annoyance. He didn't hang up the phone. He just pointed at the door. "Get out, Jordan," the dean muttered, covering the receiver with his hand. "Whatever grievance you have about the cleaning supplies budget, take it to facilities. I'm in the middle of a call with a major donor." "I am the donor, Dean," I said. I sat down in one of the guest chairs, the expensive velvet ones that scholarship kids were usually forbidden from touching. My lawyer stepped forward and placed a single document on the mahogany desk. It was the deed of gift, alongside the notice of the debt acquisition for the school's endowment fund. The dean's eyes scanned the paper. I watched the blood drain from his cheeks in real time. He dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, the voice on the other end still squawking about a birdie on the 9th hole. This is a mistake," the dean stammered, his eyes darting between me and the legal seal on the document. "Jay Carter, the founder of the Aegis Protocol? That's a ghost, an anonymous entity. You're the boy who mops the chemistry labs. I'm both," I said, leaning forward. "And for 3 years, I've watched you prioritize the whims of boys like Clinton Steele while the scholarship students live in dorms with no heat and leaking ceilings. I've sent you 12 emails about the black mold in the East Wing. You never replied. But I noticed you found the funds to build a new equestrian center for the Steele family's private use." "Jordan, listen," the dean said, his voice shifting into a desperate, oily tone of negotiation. "We can fix the dorms, immediately. I'll have a crew there by noon. There's no need to be dramatic. It's too late for a crew, Dean. I didn't come here to ask for repairs. I came here to inform you that the Board of Trustees has accepted my buyout of the school's outstanding bonds. I now hold the majority of the voting rights, and the first thing I'm voting for is an immediate audit of your discretionary spending." I looked at the royal purple scarf on my arm. It was a reminder of why I was doing this. Not just for me, but for my mother and every other person who had been made to feel like they were a service rather than a human. "Second," I continued, "I'm implementing a new code of conduct. From this moment on, any student caught recording or harassing another student based on their financial status will be subject to immediate expulsion. No appeals, no donations from their fathers to fix it." "You can't do that," the dean whispered. "The Steele family, they'll pull their funding, will be ruined." "The Steele family is already ruined," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "I've spent the last 6 hours deconstructing their holdings. By the time the markets close today, Arthur Steele won't be able to afford the gas for his private jet, let alone a donation to this school. The only name that matters at St. Jude's now is mine." I stood up and draped the scarf over the dean's desk. "Keep that as a reminder. It's the scarf Miller tried to throw in the dirt. It's the most expensive thing in this room right now because it was paid for with the dignity you tried to take from me." I walked out of the office, leaving the dean staring at the purple silk like it was a coiled snake. As I stepped back into the hallway, I saw a group of students gathered around a monitor in the lounge. They were watching the news. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, "Steele Global Holdings shares plummet amid federal audit rumors." Standing in the center of the crowd was Clinton Steele. He was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He was holding his phone, but for the first time in his life, it wasn't a weapon. It was a brick. No one was laughing. No one was recording. The Council of Suits was already beginning to move away from him, the social predators sensing a wounded animal in their midst. I walked right past him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. I headed for the supply closet to hang up my mop for the last time. My mother's birthday dinner was in 4 hours, and for the first time in my life I wasn't going to be late. I picked up my mother in the SUV. When she saw me step out of the back seat, she almost dropped her purse. She was still wearing her waitress uniform, her eyes tired but widening as she looked at the sleek black car and the driver holding the door open. I didn't give her time to ask questions. I just hugged her and told her that her shift was over, forever. We didn't go to the diner. I took her to the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place she used to walk past and joke was for the gods. As we sat down, I handed her the royal purple silk scarf. She touched the fabric with trembling fingers, tears welling up when I told her it was finally hers. But the night wasn't just about the gift. It was about the shift in the world outside our window. While we ate, the digital landslide I had triggered was gaining speed. On my tablet, I watched the real-time data of the Steele family's collapse. It wasn't just an audit anymore. The flag for review I had sent to the Federal Reserve had acted like a master key, unlocking a vault of hidden debts and offshore tax evasions that Arthur Steele had kept buried for decades. By the time the dessert arrived, Steele Global Holdings had been suspended from the stock exchange. The Steele name, which had been a golden ticket 48 hours ago, was now radioactive. The next morning I returned to St. Jude's, not as a janitor but as the keynote speaker for the annual Founders Gala. The event was supposed to be the crowning moment for families like the Steeles, a night where they paraded their wealth under the guise of supporting education. I arrived in a tailored navy suit that fit me like armor. As I walked through the ballroom, the silence followed me like a wake. The students who had filmed me in the rain now looked at their shoes as I passed. The professors who had mocked my interest in physics stood stiffly, holding their champagne glasses with white knuckles. I saw Clinton Steele near the bar. He wasn't wearing cashmere tonight. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He was surrounded by a few remaining hangers-on, but even they were looking for an exit. When he saw me, he didn't sneer. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "You did this," he hissed, stumbling toward me. "My dad's assets are frozen. The house is being seized. You destroyed a family over a stupid latte and a scarf?" "No, Clinton," I said, my voice carrying just enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "I didn't destroy your family, I just stopped maintaining the illusion. Your father built a house of cards, and you decided to blow the roof off it by thinking everyone else was beneath you. I didn't break you, I just stopped cleaning up your mess." I walked onto the stage, the dean standing to the side, looking like he'd aged a decade in a single night. I didn't use a teleprompter. I didn't use notes. I looked out at the room full of the city's elite and began to speak. "For 3 years I was a ghost in these halls," I told the silent audience. "I knew the combination to every locker, the password to every server, and the exact location of every stain on these floors. You thought you were the architects of this world, but you forgot one thing: an architect only designs. It's the people you don't notice, the ones who build, the ones who clean, the ones who maintain, who actually hold the keys." I paused, looking directly at the table where the school's biggest donors sat. "As the new majority stakeholder of St. Jude's, my first act is to dissolve the legacy admissions program. From now on, the only thing that gets you a seat in this hall is your mind. And as for the Steel Equestrian Center, it's being demolished. We're building a state-of-the-art tech incubator for scholarship students in its place." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I stepped down from the podium, but I didn't go back to a very important person table. I walked toward the exit, where the catering staff was standing in the shadows, holding trays of hors d'oeuvres. I stopped in front of a young man holding a tray of shrimp cocktails. He looked about 19, with the same tired, invisible look I had worn for years. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the penny I'd taken back from Clinton, and placed it on his tray. "Keep the change," I said with a wink, "and keep your eyes on the stars. The floor is just a place to stand." As I walked out into the cool night air, I felt the weight of the J0 secret finally lift. I wasn't a janitor, and I wasn't just a hacker. I was a man who had finally set the record straight. 1 month later, the dust hadn't just settled, the landscape had been completely terraformed. I sat in a glass-walled office in the new Carter Tech Incubator, the building that used to house the Steele family's private stables. The smell of expensive hay and privilege had been replaced by the ozone of soldering irons and the hum of high-speed servers. Sterling walked in and dropped a folder on my desk. "The sentencing for Miller is in. 6 months for fraud and a permanent ban from retail management." He tried to claim he was under extreme professional stress, but the viral video of him tossing your mother's money was the nail in the coffin. Nobody wants to touch him. I nodded, looking out the window at the quad. "And the Steeles? Arthur Steele is facing 20 years for the tax evasion you uncovered." "The assets are fully liquidated," Sterling said, a hint of a smile on his face. "As for Clinton, he's officially been expelled from St. Jude's. His donated credits were revoked after the audit proved he hadn't written a single one of his own papers in 3 years. He's currently living in a studio apartment on the east side. It's about 400 square feet. I believe he's working at a local car wash to make ends meet." I stood up and grabbed my jacket. "I think I'll go for a walk." I drove down to the east side, the neighborhood where I'd grown up. I found the car wash Sterling had mentioned. It was a gritty, high-volume place where the workers spent all day in heavy rubber boots soaked to the bone. I pulled my SUV into the line. As I reached the front, a worker in a stained yellow vest approached the window. He was holding a spray bottle and a rag. His hair was matted with sweat and soap suds, and his face was red from the heat of the industrial dryers. It was Clinton Steele. He didn't recognize the car at first. He just leaned down, his voice weary and cracked. "That'll be $20 for the basic wash, sir. Vacuuming is extra." I rolled down the window. The moment our eyes met, Clinton froze. The rag in his hand went limp. He looked at me, then at the luxury interior of the SUV, then down at his own wet, calloused hands. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. "Jordan," he whispered. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just watched him. I wanted to see if there was any of that old fire left, any of that arrogance that had allowed him to pour a latte on the floor just to watch a man kneel. There was nothing. Just the hollow stare of someone who had finally realized that the trash he'd been mocking was the only thing that had been keeping his world clean. "You missed a spot on the hubcap," I said quietly. Clinton flinched. He looked like he wanted to scream, to throw the bottle at me, to walk away. But he couldn't. He needed the job. He needed the paycheck. He took a deep breath, knelt down on the wet concrete, the same way I had knelt in the student union, and started scrubbing the rim of my wheel. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a roll of hundreds. I pulled out a single, shiny penny, the same one I had carried since the night at the boutique. I set it on the ledge of the window. "Keep the change, Clinton," I said. "And remember what Professor Holloway told me. Focus on the dirt. It's much more within your reach." I rolled up the window and drove away. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt balanced. I headed back to my mother's new house, a quiet place with a garden she could finally tend to without worrying about the rent. As I sat with her on the porch, watching the sun set over a city that I now helped run, I realized that my father had been wrong. The world isn't just cruel, it's a mirror. If you spend your life trying to make people invisible, eventually, you're the one who disappears. I pulled out my phone one last time and deleted the J0 administrator account. I didn't need a secret identity anymore. I didn't need to be a ghost. For the first time in my life, I was exactly who I wanted to be, a man who knew the value of a clean floor and the price of a cold heart. The invisible janitor was gone. Jordan Carter was finally home. The graduation ceremony for St. Jude's Ivy Academy was usually a parade of silk gowns, family crests, and legacy speeches about carrying the torch of excellence. But this year, the atmosphere was different. The air was charged with a tension that hadn't existed before. The giant bronze statue of the school's founder in the quad had been polished until it glowed, but the name on the new science wing, the Carter Innovation Center, was what everyone was staring at. I stood backstage, listening to the muffled roar of the crowd. I was wearing the traditional black graduation gown, but underneath it, I wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a crisp white shirt. I was wearing my old faded Navy St. Jude's Facilities hoodie. It was a bit frayed at the cuffs and still had a faint permanent scent of floor wax, but it felt more like me than any suit ever could. "You're up, Jordan," the new acting dean whispered. He was a former scholarship advisor I had promoted after the audit purged the old administration. He looked at me with a mix of awe and genuine respect. I stepped out onto the stage. The sun was high, glinting off the thousands of chairs set up on the lawn. In the front row sat my mother. She was wearing a dress the color of the sky and the royal purple silk scarf I had bought her. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, tearful nod. She didn't need a billionaire, son. She just needed to see me standing tall. I walked to the podium. The silence that fell over the audience was absolute. They weren't just waiting for a speech. They were waiting for a verdict. 4 years ago, I walked onto this campus with a mop in my hand and a plastic bag full of borrowed books. I began, my voice steady and amplified by the speakers. I was told by my professors to focus on the dirt, not the stars. I was told by my classmates that I was a ghost, someone who existed only to make their lives more comfortable. I was even thrown out of a store because I didn't look like someone who deserved to own something beautiful. I paused, looking toward the back of the crowd. I knew Clinton Steele wasn't there. He was likely finishing a shift at the car wash, but his shadow was everywhere. For a long time I believed them. I thought that my value was tied to my bank account or the logo on my chest. But then I realized something. The people who look down on you aren't doing it because they are higher up. They're doing it because they're afraid that if they stop looking down, they'll realize we're already standing right beside them. I reached up and unzipped my graduation gown, letting it fall to the floor. The crowd gasped as I stood there in my janitor's hoodie. "This hoodie represents the hours I spent cleaning up messes I didn't make," I said, gripping the edges of the podium. "It represents the nights I spent coding until my eyes bled while the rest of you were at parties. It represents the grit that money can't buy and legacy can't inherit. To the graduates here today who came from nothing, this school belongs to you now. Not because I bought it, but because you earned it. And to those who were born with everything, your inheritance is a gift, but it is not a shield. If you use your power to silence others, you will eventually find yourselves living in a very quiet, very lonely world." I looked at the faculty. "I'm graduating today as your valedictorian, but I'm also graduating as your landlord. And my first decree is this: every student who works a service job on this campus will from this day forward have their tuition fully covered by the Carter Endowment. We are done charging people for the privilege of cleaning our floors." The applause didn't start all at once. It began with a single scholarship student in the back row, then another, until it swelled into a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the academy. I walked off the stage before the noise died down. I didn't need the trophy. I didn't need the handshake. I walked straight to my mother, took her hand, and we walked toward the gates together. As we passed the main fountain, I saw a new freshman, a girl in a worn-out coat, looking lost and intimidated by the massive stone buildings. I stopped, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small gold lapel pin I'd had made. It was in the shape of a simple North Star. I handed it to her. "Don't let them tell you where to look," I told her. She looked at the pin, then at me, her eyes widening as she recognized my face from the news. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "Call me Jordan," I said with a smile. "I used to work here." As we drove away, I looked back at the spires of St. Jude's one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quad. The invisible janitor was officially a legend, a story parents would tell their kids to make them behave, and a story scholarship kids would tell themselves to keep going. The system was updated, the architect was moving on, and for the first time in my life, the stars didn't look so far away. 6 months had passed since graduation, and my life was no longer measured by the square footage of marble I had polished, but by the impact of the code I had written. The Carter Initiative was no longer just a school scholarship. It had grown into a global network. We were building tech centers in neighborhoods that the world had written off, providing high-speed internet and high-level encryption tools to people who had been told their only future was in manual labor. I was sitting in my headquarters, the top floor of a skyscraper that overlooked the very boutique district where my life had changed. Sterling walked in, dropping a digital tablet on my desk. "The final liquidation of Steel Global is complete," Sterling said. "We managed to acquire their remaining server farms for pennies on the dollar. But that's not why I'm here. I thought you'd want to see the legacy report on the people who crossed you." I took the tablet. The first name on the list was Miller, the former manager of Vogue and Verve. He hadn't just lost his job, he had become a pariah in the luxury industry. The video of him humiliating me had become a case study in corporate training for what not to do. He was currently working as a night shift security guard at a warehouse in the outskirts of the city. He was now the one standing in the shadows, watching people more successful than him go about their lives. Then I scrolled down to Clinton Steele. Clinton hadn't lasted long at the car wash. His ego had been his undoing. He'd gotten into an argument with a customer, ironically over a latte spill, and had been fired on the spot. With no degree, no references, and a family name that was now synonymous with fraud, he had fallen through the cracks. The report showed a recent police filing. He had been caught trying to shoplift a designer belt from a department store. He was currently serving community service, cleaning the very streets he used to drive his convertible through. "Do you want me to intervene?" Sterling asked. "We could make it harder for them, or easier." "Neither," I said, handing the tablet back. "The world is already doing my work for me. They're experiencing life without the mask of money. That's the most honest teacher there is." I turned my chair toward the window. Below, I could see the city moving like a massive, complex machine. I saw the delivery trucks, the street sweepers, and the office workers. For the first time, I didn't see them as a hierarchy. I saw them as a circuit. I opened my laptop and looked at the Aegis protocol. I had released the source code to the public a week ago. I had given away the very thing that made me a billionaire. People thought I was crazy, but I knew better. By making the encryption free, I had made it impossible for people like Arthur Steele to hide their tracks ever again. I had built a world where transparency was the only currency that mattered. "Jordan?" a voice called from the doorway. It was my mother. She looked younger than I'd ever seen her. She was heading up our new Foundation Small Business Grant Program. She wasn't just my mother anymore, she was a leader. "We have the first round of applicants for the East Side Center," she said, her eyes bright. "There's a young man, a coder, who's currently working as a janitor at the local hospital. His work is brilliant, Jordan. He just needs a chance." I stood up and grabbed my jacket. "Let's go meet him." As we walked out, I didn't feel like a billionaire. I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a bridge. I had been the trash at the bottom, and I had been the power at the top. Now, I was the one making sure the two could finally see each other. Exactly 1 year after my graduation, I returned to the gates of St. Jude's Ivy Academy. I wasn't there for a gala, a speech, or a board meeting. I arrived in my old beat-up sneakers and a plain gray t-shirt, driving a car that didn't turn any heads. I wanted to see the world I had built when no one was looking. The campus had changed. The heavy, oppressive silence of elitism had been replaced by the hum of actual activity. Students were gathered in the quad, but they weren't divided by the brands they wore. I saw a girl in a couture jacket sitting on the grass, intensely debating a physics problem with a boy wearing a thrift store flannel. They were speaking the same language, the language of ideas. I walked toward the Carter Innovation Center. As I passed the main fountain, I saw a familiar figure. A man was bent over the edge of the stone basin, scrubbing at a streak of green algae with a stiff brush. He was wearing a neon yellow campus maintenance vest. It was Clinton Steele. He was part of a mandatory work restitution program, a condition of his recent legal troubles. He didn't see me at first. He was focused entirely on the stone, his breath hitching as he scrubbed. There were no cameras, no friends to laugh with, and no latte in his hand. I stood a few feet away, watching him. He finally looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. When he saw me, he didn't jump, he didn't scream, he just let out a long, slow sigh and dropped the brush into the bucket. "Checking up on the help, Jordan?" he asked. His voice wasn't filled with malice anymore, it was just tired. "No," I said, looking at the fountain. "I'm checking on the fountain. You missed a spot near the base." Clinton looked down, saw the small patch of grime, and slowly knelt back down to scrub it. "I guess I deserve this," he muttered. "The trash finally found its bin, right?" "No one is trash, Clinton," I said, my voice quiet. "That was your mistake, not mine. You thought people were disposable. But look at this fountain. If you don't scrub it, it turns green. If no one cleans the halls, the school rots. The people you ignored were the only reason your world stayed beautiful. Now, you're finally learning how much work it takes to keep things that way." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small laminated card. I set it on the edge of the fountain. It was an application for the Eastside Tech Center's evening classes, the ones for people starting from zero. "When your shift is over and your restitution is done, you can keep scrubbing stone," I said, "or you can learn how to build something. The choice is yours. But from now on, your last name won't help you. Only your hands will." I walked away without waiting for an answer. I headed toward the back of the campus, to the small, secluded garden behind the library where I used to hide during my breaks. I sat on the wooden bench and pulled out my phone. I opened a news app and saw a headline about a new encryption standard being adopted by the United Nations, a derivative of the Aegis Protocol. It was being called the Jordan Standard. I looked up at the stars, which were just beginning to peek through the twilight. Professor Holloway had told me to focus on the dirt. Clinton had told me to stay in my lane. But as I sat there, a self-made man who had dismantled an empire and built a bridge in its place, I realized they were both wrong. The dirt is just where you plant the seeds. The lane is just where you start the race. But the stars are for anyone brave enough to look up while they're still holding the mop. I stood up, took a deep breath of the cool evening air, and walked toward the exit. I had no more revenge to take, no more buildings to buy, and no more ghosts to hunt. For the first time in 9,000 words and 20-to-1 years, I wasn't the invisible janitor. I was Jordan Carter, and I was finally finished cleaning.